At the family party, my daughter-in-law whispered, "She doesn't know it yet, but we're counting down the days until we put her in a nursing home." I smiled and left in silence, then took back every single gift, including her wedding. Those words cut through me like a knife as I stood frozen near the kitchen doorway. Rebecca hadn't seen me standing there, just out of sight, as she spoke to my son Nathan during his job promotion celebration dinner. My hands trembled slightly, causing ripples in the red wine I'd been carrying to the table. "That house is way too big for her anyway," Rebecca continued, her voice hushed but unmistakably eager. "Once we sell it, we'll have the space we need for our family to grow." I watched my son, my only child whom I'd raised alone since he was a baby, hesitate before nodding slowly. "Mom's getting older," he said, his voice lacking conviction. "It might be for the best. 70 years of life experience taught me how to keep my composure." Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. I straightened my back, fixed a pleasant smile on my face, and walked into the dining room as if I'd heard nothing. I placed the wine on the table, making small talk with my grandson about his science project while my mind raced with the brutal reality of what I'd just overheard. My own son was planning to put me away, the same son I'd sacrificed everything for. When dinner was served, I ate mechanically, tasting nothing. The conversation swirled around me. Rebecca talking about renovations she wanted to make to their home, Nathan discussing his promotion, my grandson chattering about school. All while I sat there, the words "nursing home" echoing in my head like a cruel taunt. "Are you feeling all right, Vivian?" Rebecca asked, her concern so convincing that for a moment I almost doubted what I'd heard. "You seem distracted." "Just tired," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I think I'll head home early if you don't mind." "I'll drive you," Nathan offered, but I waved him off. No need to interrupt the celebration. "I can manage." I hugged my grandson, kissed my son's cheek, and nodded politely to Rebecca. As I collected my purse and cardigan, I caught Rebecca eyeing the antique brooch pinned to my collar, a family heirloom from my grandmother. The same look I'd seen when she admired my silver tea set, my collection of first editions, and the painting above my fireplace. The drive home was a blur. Muscle memory guided me through familiar streets, while my mind replayed moments from the past 30 years. Nathan's graduation ceremony, where I'd sat alone, bursting with pride. The day he'd introduced me to Rebecca, his eyes so full of hope. Their wedding, where I'd emptied my savings account to give them the celebration Rebecca had insisted they deserved. I remembered mortgaging my house, the home I'd worked my entire teaching career to pay off, to help them with the down payment. On their own home when Rebecca declared that Nathan's starter apartment wasn't suitable for starting a family. The memory that cut deepest was from just last year, selling my mother's jewelry collection to help cover Nathan's debts after a failed investment. Rebecca had been the one to suggest it, her voice gentle as she explained how they'd pay me back someday. There would be no someday. That much was clear now. When I arrived home, I didn't turn on the lights. I simply sat in my darkened living room, surrounded by the memories I'd built over a lifetime. Books lining the shelves that I'd collected during my 40 years as an English literature teacher. Photographs chronicling Nathan's childhood. The faded armchair where I'd graded papers while my son did his homework at my feet. This house wasn't just a property to be sold off. It was the story of my life. I thought about confronting them. Imagined the shock on their faces if I revealed what I'd overheard. But what would that accomplish? Nathan would stammer apologies. Rebecca would cry and deny, and ultimately nothing would change. They'd just be more careful with their words around me in the future. No, confrontation wasn't the answer. As the moon rose higher in the sky, casting silver light through my windows, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time in decades, I saw my relationship with my son and daughter-in-law with perfect clarity. I had been a resource to them, not a person to be cherished. I walked to my study and pulled out a leather-bound journal. It was time to make some notes. 3 days later, I answered a call from Rebecca. "Vivian, we're thinking of stopping by this weekend," she said, her voice sweet as honey. "Nathan thought it might be nice to help you organize some of those cluttered rooms. You know, lighten your load a bit." "How thoughtful," I replied, my voice giving away nothing. "But I'll be busy this weekend. I've joined a book club at the community center." "A book club?" The surprise in her voice was almost comical. "Well, that's nice. When did you start that?" "Recently. It's good to keep the mind active, don't you think?" After we hung up, I returned to what I'd been doing. carefully cataloging every gift I'd ever given them, every loan that was never repaid, every sacrifice I'd made for their comfort and happiness. Next to this list, I was developing another one: steps to reclaim my life and dignity. The nursing home comment hadn't just hurt me, it had awakened me. That night, I called my old colleague Eleanor, who had retired from teaching the same year. I had. They said what? Eleanor's voice crackled with indignation over the phone. They're planning to put me in a nursing home and sell my house, I repeated, surprised at how steady my voice remained. Vivian, that's elder abuse. You need to confront them immediately. I sighed, twisting the phone cord between my fingers. Confrontation won't solve anything, Eleanor. I need to be strategic. What are you planning? I'm going to take back everything they've taken from me, I said. Not out of vengeance, but because I've finally realized I need to protect myself. The next morning, I made an appointment with Gerald Hoffman, an attorney who specialized in elder law. As I sat in his office explaining my situation, I watched his expression shift from professional interest to genuine concern. Unfortunately, Mrs. Lancaster, your situation is more common than you might think, he said, placing his pen down on his legal pad. Adult children often feel entitled to their parents' assets, especially when there's a history of financial support. What are my options? I asked. He leaned forward. That depends on how the gifts were transferred. Did you document any of these as loans? Do you have any written agreements? I shook my head. They were my family. I trusted them. His smile was sympathetic but determined. Family or not, you have rights. Let's review exactly what assets we're talking about and develop a strategy to protect you and recover what's rightfully yours. As I left his office that afternoon, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time since overhearing Rebecca's callous words, I felt something other than hurt. I felt powerful. Little did Nathan and Rebecca know, their countdown to putting me in a nursing home had started a very different kind of countdown. One that would change all our lives forever. The next morning, I found myself standing in front of the mahogany chest in my bedroom, the one I hadn't opened in nearly 20 years. My fingers traced the ornate carvings before I finally turned the small brass key. Inside lay the fragments of a life I'd carefully packed away, remnants of pain, sacrifice, and a younger woman's dreams. I lifted out a faded photograph. Me at 25, holding baby Nathan, my face thin with exhaustion but radiant with love. Robert, my husband, was nowhere in the picture. By then, he'd already left us for his secretary and a new life in California, declaring that fatherhood wasn't for him. Your daddy's going to come back, I had whispered to Nathan night after night, even though the divorce papers had already been signed. I never spoke those words again after the day I received a letter from Robert's lawyer, explaining that he wouldn't be paying child support after all, some legal loophole he'd found. That night, I'd cried until there were no tears left, then woke up the next morning and applied for a second job. I'd never wanted Nathan to feel the absence of his father, so I worked twice as hard to fill both roles. Teaching high school English during the day, tutoring in the evenings, grading papers late into the night. Somehow, I still found time to attend every Little League game, help with science projects, and read bedtime stories. I pulled out Nathan's college acceptance letter to Princeton, remembering how my heart had swelled with pride. What the letter didn't show was how I'd sold my car and taken a loan against my retirement to afford his tuition. It's an investment in your future, I told him when he expressed concern about the cost. That's what parents do. Beneath the letter lay a small velvet box containing my mother's pearls, the only valuable thing she'd ever owned. I'd planned to give them to Nathan's bride someday, but when I'd offered them to Rebecca before the wedding, she'd examined them with barely concealed disappointment. They're lovely, Vivian, but a bit old-fashioned, don't you think? Besides, I've already chosen a diamond set to go with my dress. I'd smiled and put them away, ignoring the sting. Later that same week, Rebecca had casually mentioned the perfect honeymoon to Bali she'd been dreaming of, and how disappointed she was that they couldn't afford it on Nathan's starting salary. The next day, I'd gone to the bank and withdrawn $15,000 from my retirement fund, accepting the hefty penalty without complaint. A wedding gift, I told them, watching Rebecca's eyes light up not with gratitude, but with triumph. The memories continued to surface as I sifted through the chest. Nathan's first serious job interview. I'd paid for his tailored suit. the down payment for their house, $50,000 from remortgaging my own home, Rebecca's medical, bills during a difficult pregnancy, covered by selling the lakeside cottage I'd inherited from my parents, the one place I'd always found peace. Each sacrifice had seemed natural at the time. That's what mothers do, I'd told myself. They give and give until there's nothing left. But when had giving become expected? When had my generosity transformed from gift to obligation? I picked up a tarnished silver frame holding a photo from Nathan and Rebecca's wedding. I stood at the edge of the frame while Rebecca's parents occupied the center, flanking the beaming couple. I remembered how Rebecca's mother had insisted on rearranging us for better balance. At the time, I'd told myself it didn't matter. But it did matter. It was the first of many small erasures. I closed the chest, my resolve strengthening. The past couldn't be changed, but the future, that was still mine to shape. I spent the next week visiting my bank, my insurance company, and my investment advisor. Each conversation revealed what I'd long suspected, but had been unwilling to face. My finances were in far worse shape than they should have been after a lifetime of careful work. You've made some significant withdrawals over the past 10 years, my financial advisor noted, frowning at his computer screen. These large lump sums have seriously impacted your retirement security. I nodded. Family emergencies. His expression softened with understanding. Mrs. Lancaster, I've been doing this job for 30 years. I've seen this pattern before. Are you certain these emergencies aren't becoming habitual? I didn't answer immediately, thinking of the emergencies that had depleted my savings. Nathan's failed business venture, Rebecca's designer kitchen renovation, private school tuition for my grandson, because the public school wasn't challenging enough. Not anymore, I finally replied. Things are changing. The next day, I visited my house of 40 years with new eyes. The antique desk in the study that Rebecca had often admired, the silver tea service from my grandmother, the first edition books I'd collected throughout my teaching career, the oil paintings I'd purchased during my one trip to Europe before Nathan was born. Each item held memories, yes, but they were also assets, my assets. Assets that Rebecca had been mentally cataloging each time she visited, I now realized. Assets she planned to sell once I was safely tucked away in some bargain nursing home. I began making discreet calls to appraisers and auction houses. Not because I planned to sell everything, but because I needed to know exactly what I had and what I stood to lose. On Friday evening, Nathan called. Mom, Rebecca, and I were thinking of coming over tomorrow to help you sort through some things. You know, lighten your load a bit. The same phrasing Rebecca had used, they must have rehearsed it. That's thoughtful, dear, I said, keeping my voice warm. But I'm actually meeting Eleanor for lunch, and then we're attending a lecture at the community college. A lecture? He sounded genuinely surprised. On what? Estate planning and elder law, I replied truthfully, taking a small satisfaction in the prolonged silence that followed. Oh, he finally managed. Well, that's good, I guess. It's important to be informed. I couldn't agree more. After hanging up, I returned to the list I'd been making. It wasn't just about reclaiming physical items. It was about reclaiming my agency, my dignity, and my future. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son and his wife had intended to take everything from me, but their scheme had instead awakened something I'd lost long ago. My sense of self-worth. The following Wednesday, I invited Nathan and Rebecca for dinner. I needed to see them, to observe them now that my eyes were fully open. They arrived bearing a bouquet of carnations, the cheapest flowers at the supermarket, and a bottle of wine. I recognized from the discount section. Nathan kissed my cheek absent-mindedly while Rebecca immediately began wandering the living room, her eyes lingering on my possessions with poorly disguised interest. Oh, Vivian, have you always had this crystal vase? It's exquisite, she said, picking up my mother's favorite piece, her fingers leaving smudges on the polished surface. Yes, it was my mother's, I replied, gently taking it from her hands and returning it to the shelf. It's one of my most treasured possessions. You have so many beautiful things, she said with a sigh. It must be exhausting keeping track of it all at your age. At my age. As if 70 meant I was incapable of managing my own home. Throughout dinner, I watched them exchange glances whenever they thought I wasn't looking. Nathan barely met my eyes, focused instead on the meal before him. Rebecca, however, was effusively attentive, refilling my wine glass at every opportunity, asking pointed questions about my daily routine and whether I ever felt overwhelmed. It was a performance, I realized. They were building a case, gathering evidence of my supposed decline to justify their plans. As I served dessert, a perfect lemon tart from my mother's recipe, Rebecca leaned forward, her voice honeyed with false concern. Vivian, Nathan, and I have been talking. We're a bit worried about you being alone in this big house. Have you ever considered downsizing to somewhere more manageable? I took a small bite of tart, savoring the perfect balance of sweet and tart before answering. Actually, I said, meeting her gaze steadily, I've been giving my future a great deal of thought lately. Their expressions brightened simultaneously, like predators sensing vulnerability. You have? Nathan asked, suddenly engaged in the conversation. Yes, I replied, smiling serenely. I've realized it's time for some significant changes. Rebecca reached across the table to squeeze my hand. That's so wise of you, Vivian. Change can be frightening, but sometimes it's necessary. Exactly, I agreed, withdrawing my hand gently, which is why I've decided to start reclaiming my life, one piece at a time. They exchanged confused glances, not yet understanding that. The countdown they'd started had set something unstoppable in motion, something they would soon regret. The first item disappeared after Nathan and Rebecca's dinner visit, my grandmother's crystal vase. I noticed its absence while watering the orchids. After searching every cabinet, the truth became undeniable. It had been taken. Rather than confronting Nathan, I stayed silent and observed. This wasn't the first time items had vanished after their visits. A silver letter opener, porcelain figurine, several first edition books. Each time, I'd attributed the disappearances to my own forgetfulness. How convenient that narrative must have been for Rebecca, the forgetful old woman who couldn't keep track of her possessions. I began listing everything I remembered disappearing. The pattern was clear. They took valuable but not prominently displayed items. Things I might not immediately notice were gone. They were testing my awareness, building their case for the nursing home. That afternoon, I met Eleanor for coffee. After 40 years of teaching together, she knew me better than anyone. Have you called the police? She demanded after hearing my story. I shook my head. And tell them what? That my son and daughter-in-law are gradually stealing from me? I have no proof. Then get proof, Eleanor said firmly. My niece Sarah is a social worker specializing in elder abuse. She sees this all the time. Adult children gaslighting parents into thinking they're incompetent. Gaslighting, I repeated, making me doubt my own memory. Exactly. Sarah's visiting this weekend. Let me bring her to your house for advice. I hesitated, embarrassed. Having a social worker in my home felt like admitting failure. Eleanor read my expression. This isn't weakness, Vivian. It's strategy. Remember? Sun Tzu. Know your enemy and know yourself. I smiled despite myself. In 100 battles, you will never be defeated. Sarah arrived Sunday, a practical woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. What you're describing follows a classic pattern of elder exploitation, she said after I explained. The missing items, suggestions about your competence, these are warning signs. But they're my family, I said, the words sounding hollow. Unfortunately, family members are the most common perpetrators, Sarah replied gently. They have the most access and often feel entitled to an elder's assets. She outlined steps to protect myself, secure valuables outside my home, document everything, and get a cognitive assessment from a geriatric specialist not recommended by my son. Having documentation of your mental competence will be crucial if they challenge your decision-making capacity later. You think they would go that far? Sarah's expression softened. In my experience, once people start down this path, they rarely stop voluntarily. The following day, I saw Dr. Harriet Chen. The cognitive assessment was thorough. Memory tests, problem-solving exercises, questions about current events. Mrs. Lancaster, your cognitive function is excellent, better than many patients 20 years your junior. Relief washed over me. Having medical confirmation felt like a shield. As I left, my phone chimed with Rebecca's text. Nathan and I are stopping by tomorrow to organize your medicine cabinet. No need to prepare. The presumption was breathtaking. They hadn't asked if I needed help or if tomorrow was convenient. They had simply decided. I texted back, tomorrow doesn't work. I have appointments all day. Her response came quickly. What appointments? What appointments? Do you need Nathan to drive you? I turned my phone off, my decision crystallizing. Time to accelerate my plans. The next morning, I rented a storage unit and called Thomas Blackwell, an art appraiser who had helped me acquire my collection years ago. Not selling, Thomas. Safeguarding, I explained. He arrived that afternoon, examining each painting, antique, and piece of fine china. This Morrissout landscape has appreciated considerably. Current market value would be around $45,000. I nodded, making notes. Rebecca had often commented on how quaint the painting was, clearly unaware of its value. The first edition Austin collection is worth approximately $30,000, and this Georgian silver tea service? Easily $12,000. By evening, my home looked noticeably barer. The most valuable items were safely in storage, replaced by inexpensive reproductions that wouldn't immediately reveal the switch. When Nathan arrived unexpectedly, looking uncomfortable, I invited him in. "Mom," Rebecca said, "you weren't answering her texts. We were worried." "I've been busy reorganizing," I replied. His eyes scanned the living room, widening slightly at the subtle changes. "Reorganizing?" "Yes. Making some changes in my life. Long overdue ones." As I prepared tea using an ordinary ceramic pot rather than my grandmother's silver service, Nathan examined the shelves, confused. "Mom, didn't you have some old books here?" "First editions? I've reorganized my collection. Some items are being professionally restored." "Restored? All at once? That must be expensive." I handed him tea with a smile. "I'm managing my assets carefully these days. Speaking of which, when might I expect repayment for Rebecca's business loan last year?" Nathan's face flushed. "Loan? We understood that was a gift." "Did you? How interesting." "I distinctly remember discussing repayment terms." He set his cup down, untouched. "Mom, is everything okay? You seem different." "Everything is perfectly fine. I'm simply taking a more active role in managing my affairs." I placed my cup in the sink. "Was there something specific you needed this evening?" He left shortly after, visibly unsettled. I watched him sit in his car, phone to ear, undoubtedly reporting to Rebecca about his strange, suddenly independent mother. Let them worry, I thought. Let them wonder. The balance of power was shifting, and they didn't even realize it yet. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of quiet activity. Each day, I methodically reclaimed pieces of my life that had been gradually slipping away. Gerald, my attorney, helped me draft letters formally documenting all past loans to Nathan and Rebecca. We filed paperwork securing my house with additional legal protections. I updated my will, removing the blanket inheritance Nathan had always assumed would be his. "You're sure about this?" Gerald asked as I signed the documents. "Absolutely," I replied. "My legacy will go where it's truly appreciated." 3 days after Nathan's visit, Rebecca called, her voice sugary with forced concern. "Vivian? Darling, Nathan mentioned you've been rearranging things. We're worried you might be overwhelmed." "No need to worry," I replied calmly. "I'm simply organizing my life." "Well, that's good," she hesitated. "But we noticed some valuable things seem to be missing. Your mother's silver tea set, those first edition books. We're concerned someone might be taking advantage of you." The irony was almost laughable. "How thoughtful of you to notice, Rebecca. But everything is exactly where it should be." "Are you sure? Because if someone is stealing from you..." "I'm quite certain no one is stealing from me anymore," I interrupted, emphasizing the last word just enough. The silence on the line stretched for several seconds. "What do you mean by anymore?" she finally asked, her voice noticeably tighter. "Simply that I'm keeping better track of my possessions these days." I paused. "By the way, I've been meaning to ask about my crystal vase, the one that was on the side table during your last visit. Have you seen it?" No, of course not. Why would I have seen your vase? Just wondering. It seems to have disappeared." I kept my tone light. "Well, I must go. I have an appointment with my attorney in 30 minutes. "Your attorney? What for?" "Estate planning, Rebecca. At my age, it's important to have everything properly documented, don't you agree?" I ended the call before she could respond, imagining her panicked expression. The careful manipulation that had worked for so long was unraveling, thread by thread. That afternoon, while organizing papers in my study, I discovered something I'd forgotten: a spare key to Nathan and Rebecca's house. They'd given it to me years ago for emergencies or to water plants when they traveled. I'd never used it, but now it rested in my palm like a small, significant weight. A plan began forming in my mind. The opportunity came 3 days later when Rebecca called to announce they were attending a weekend fundraiser in the city. I waited until Saturday morning when I knew they'd be gone before driving to their house. It wasn't breaking in, I reasoned. I had a key, and I wasn't planning to take anything that wasn't rightfully mine. Their house was a monument to acquisition. Every surface showcasing luxury items, many of which I recognized as gifts I'd provided over the years. The living room featured my grandfather's antique desk. The dining room displayed china I'd given them for their 5th anniversary. Even the guest bathroom held monogrammed hand towels I'd purchased during a trip to Italy. I worked methodically, photographing each item that had originated from me, making notes of when they'd been given and under what circumstances. This wasn't about taking things back. Not yet. This was about documentation. In Rebecca's home office, I found something unexpected, a folder labeled Vivian Care Options. Inside were brochures for 3 nursing homes, all in the next county, all significantly below average in their ratings. The cheapest options available, despite Nathan's substantial income. More disturbing were the printed emails between Rebecca and a local doctor I'd never met. She'd been describing symptoms I supposedly exhibited: confusion, memory loss, occasional paranoia, building a case for diminished capacity. She'd been laying this groundwork for over 6 months. I photographed everything with trembling hands. My suspicions confirmed in the worst possible way. They weren't just planning to move me. They were actively working to have me declared incompetent. As I was about to leave, one final document caught my eye, a medical information release form, with what appeared to be my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. It was a clumsy forgery, the loops of my cursive slightly wrong, the pressure points inconsistent with my handwriting. Rebecca had forged my signature on a medical document. That wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. I drove home in a daze, the evidence secured in my purse. When I arrived, I found Nathan's car in my driveway. He was sitting on my porch steps, his expression thunderous. "Where have you been?" he demanded as I approached. "I've been calling for hours." "I was out," I replied simply, clutching my purse tighter. "Why are you here, Nathan?" "I thought you and Rebecca were at a fundraiser." "Rebecca went alone. I came to check on you after you weren't answering your phone." His eyes narrowed. "You've been acting strange lately, Mom. Really strange." "Have I?" I unlocked my front door, gesturing for him to follow me inside. "How so?" "You know how." He paced my living room, agitated. The missing items, the sudden appointments, the talk about loans and repayments. "Rebecca thinks you might be getting confused, does she?" I set my purse down carefully, keeping it close. "And what do you think, Nathan?" He stopped pacing, his expression softening into something like pity. "I think you're getting older, Mom. And sometimes that means needing help, even if you don't realize it." "Help," I repeated. "Like being placed in a nursing home?" The color drained from his face. "What?" "Sunrise Valley Care Center," I said, naming the cheapest facility from Rebecca's folder. "That's where you and Rebecca are planning to put me, isn't it? So you can sell my house and take what's left of my possessions?" "Mom, where would you get such an idea?" "I heard you," I said quietly. "At your promotion dinner. You and Rebecca discussing how you were counting down the days until you could put me in a nursing home." Nathan's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a student caught cheating on an exam, desperate for an excuse but finding none. "It's not what you think," he finally managed. "Rebecca sometimes says things, dramatically. We just want what's best for you." "What's best for me?" I echoed. Like having Rebecca describe false symptoms to a doctor I've never met? Like forging my signature on medical release forms? His face went from pale to ashen. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter how I know, Nathan. What matters is that I do know. Everything." We stood in silence, the weight of revealed truths hanging between us. My son, the baby I'd held through countless nights, the boy I'd worked 2 jobs to support, the man I'd sacrificed so much for, looked at me like a stranger. Or worse, like an obstacle. "Mom," he finally said, his voice low, "you don't understand. We have bills. The mortgage is—" "Stop." I held up my hand. "Don't make this worse by lying. This was never about my welfare. It was about my assets." He didn't deny it. "I think you should leave now," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. "Mom, please, go home to Rebecca, Nathan. Tell her I'm not confused at all." I walked to the door and opened it. In fact, I'm seeing things more clearly than I have in years. After he left, I sat in my silent living room, Silent living room, the folder of evidence beside me. My heart ached, not just with betrayal, but with clarity. For years, I'd allowed myself to be diminished, to be treated as an ATM rather than a mother. No more. I picked up the phone and called my attorney. Gerald? It's Vivian Lancaster. I need to move forward with everything we discussed, immediately. The time for silence was over. Now was the time for action. The weeks following my confrontation with Nathan were eerily quiet. No unexpected visits, no sugary phone calls from Rebecca, no casual drop-ins to check on me. My sudden assertion of independence had clearly unsettled them, forcing a retreat while they recalibrated their strategy. I used this time wisely. Gerald and I filed a formal complaint regarding the forged medical documents, triggering an investigation. I changed all my locks, updated my banking information, and documented every valuable item still in my possession with photos and appraisals. You're building quite the case, Gerald remarked during one of our meetings. But what exactly are you planning to do with all this evidence? I'm not entirely sure yet, I admitted. But I know I need to be prepared for whatever comes next. What came next was unexpected, even to me. Eleanor called one rainy Tuesday afternoon, her voice tight with urgency. Vivian, I just heard something disturbing. Do you know Dr. Philip Montgomery? The name was vaguely familiar. I believe he's the physician Rebecca was communicating with. Why? My neighbor works as a receptionist in his office. She overheard Rebecca making an appointment for you for a competency evaluation this Friday at 3 p.m. My blood ran cold. I never agreed to any evaluation. Exactly. Rebecca claimed to be your caretaker and said you're experiencing significant cognitive decline. She's bringing documentation. Forged documentation, undoubtedly. The boldness of it was breathtaking. Thank you for telling me, Eleanor. What will you do? I considered my options. I could call Rebecca and confront her, but that would alert her that I knew about her plan. I could refuse to attend the appointment, but that might be used against me as evidence of paranoia or resistance to care. Or I could turn the tables completely. I think I'll keep that appointment, I said finally, just not in the way Rebecca expects. Friday arrived with dreary persistence. At 2:30 p.m., I drove to Dr. Montgomery's office, accompanied by Gerald and Dr. Chen, who had brought my recent cognitive assessment results. We arrived 15 minutes before Rebecca was scheduled to appear. The receptionist looked confused when I approached the desk. Mrs. Lancaster? But your appointment isn't until 3, and your daughter-in-law called to say she'd be bringing you. I decided to come on my own, I replied pleasantly, and I've brought my attorney and my personal physician. Her eyes widened as she took in Gerald's professional demeanor and Dr. Chen's white coat. I'll let Dr. Montgomery know you're here. We were ushered into a consultation room within minutes. Dr. Montgomery, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, appeared flustered by our unexpected configuration. Mrs. Lancaster, he began cautiously, I understood your daughter-in-law would be accompanying you today. I'm sure she'll arrive shortly, I replied. In the meantime, I wanted to discuss something concerning with you, Doctor. Are you aware that Rebecca Lancaster has been providing you with false information about my mental state? His mouth opened, slightly, then closed. That's a serious accusation. Gerald stepped forward, placing a folder on the desk. We have evidence that Mrs. Rebecca Lancaster has been systematically building a false case regarding my client's competency, including forging Mrs. Vivian Lancaster's signature on medical release forms. Dr. Chen here has conducted a thorough cognitive assessment showing Mrs. Lancaster is fully competent. Dr. Montgomery's face paled as he opened the folder, scanning the contents with increasing alarm. I had no idea. Mrs. Lancaster, these symptoms your daughter-in-law described are entirely fabricated, I finished for him. Part of a plan to have me declared incompetent so she and my son could gain control of my assets. He looked genuinely distressed. This is deeply troubling. I would never... The door opened abruptly, and Rebecca swept in, her designer handbag swinging. Sorry I'm late, Dr. Montgomery. Traffic was... She froze, taking in the scene before her. Me, calm and composed. Gerald with his legal pad, Dr. Chen standing protectively nearby, and Dr. Montgomery looking at her with new suspicion. Vivian? She managed, her voice unnaturally high. What's going on? I thought we agreed I'd bring you to this appointment. Never discussed any appointment, Rebecca, I said calmly, just as we never discussed you describing false symptoms to Dr. Montgomery or forging my signature on medical documents. The color drained from her face. That's ridiculous. I would never— Mrs. Lancaster, Dr. Montgomery interrupted, his voice now cool and professional. I've just reviewed some concerning information. Perhaps you could explain why the symptoms you've reported contradict the assessment performed. By Dr. Chen here? Rebecca's gaze darted around the room like a trapped animal's. There's clearly been a misunderstanding. Vivian has been confused lately, forgetting conversations we've had. Actually, Dr. Chen interjected, Mrs. Vivian Lancaster's cognitive function is above average for her age group. There's no evidence of confusion or memory impairment. Rebecca's composure cracked. This is absurd. Nathan and I have only been trying to help. Vivian needs assistance. She's been acting erratically, hiding things, making accusations. Like accusing you of stealing my crystal vase? I asked mildly. Or my silver service? Or my first editions? The items that mysteriously disappeared? After your visits? I never took anything. Rebecca's voice rose sharply. You're proving my point right now with these paranoid accusations. Gerald cleared his throat. Mrs. Lancaster, we have documentation of items that have gone missing from Mrs. Vivian's home, many of which have been photographed in your possession. Additionally, we have evidence of your attempts to have Mrs. Vivian declared incompetent, including this fraudulent appointment. Rebecca's facade finally shattered. You don't understand, she hissed, turning to me. We've taken care of you. For years. Who do you think checked on you every week? Who helped with your bills? Who listened to your endless stories about books no one cares about anymore? The raw contempt in her voice hung in the air. I never asked for your care, Rebecca, I said quietly. And I certainly never needed it. No? She laughed bitterly. Then why did you keep giving us money whenever we asked? Why did you sign over that vacation property to us? Why did you pay for everything if you didn't need our approval, our visits, our tolerance? Each word was a revelation, not of my dependence, but of her calculation. I did those things because I loved my son, I replied simply, and I thought that meant supporting his family. I didn't realize I was just being used. Dr. Montgomery, looking increasingly uncomfortable, stood up. I think we should reschedule this. There's nothing to reschedule, Doctor, Gerald interrupted. Mrs. Vivian Lancaster is here to inform you that she's filing a formal complaint regarding the false information you've been provided and the attempted medical fraud. She's also prepared to pursue legal action against Rebecca Lancaster for attempted elder abuse and financial exploitation. Rebecca's face contorted. You ungrateful old woman! After everything we've done, I think we're finished here, I said, rising from my chair with a dignity I didn't entirely feel. Please tell Nathan I'm disappointed in him. Not for wanting my money, that I could almost understand, but for lacking the courage to face me himself. As we left the office, Rebecca's angry sobs echoed behind us. I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness mixed with determination. The final threads connecting me to my son's family had been severed, not by my hand, but by their own actions. In the parking lot, Dr. Chen squeezed my arm gently. You were very brave in there, Vivian. Not brave, I replied. Just finally awake. Gerald opened my car door. What now? I looked at the gray sky, feeling raindrops beginning to fall. Now I reclaim my life completely. That evening, as I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, my phone rang. Nathan's name flashed on the screen. I answered, bracing myself. How could you do this to us? He demanded without preamble, his voice raw with anger. Rebecca is devastated. Do you have any idea what you've done? I protected myself, I replied calmly. Something I should have done long ago. Protected yourself? He nearly shouted. From what? Your family? The people who care about you? Care about me? I echoed. Is that what you call planning to put me in a nursing home without my knowledge, stealing my possessions, having your wife forge my signature on medical documents? Silence stretched between us. It wasn't like that, he finally said, his voice lower. You're twisting everything. Nathan, I said softly, I heard you. At your promotion dinner. I heard what Rebecca said about counting down the days until you could put me in a nursing home. I heard you agree. More silence. Mom, he began, his tone shifting to something placating. You misunderstood. We were just worried about you living alone. Stop lying, Nathan. Please, just once, be honest with me. I heard him exhale heavily. What do you want from us? He finally asked. Nothing, I replied, surprising myself with how true it felt. I don't want anything from you anymore. And with that, I ended the call, feeling strangely light. The confrontation I dreaded was over, and I had survived. More than survived. I had prevailed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, for the first time in years, I would sleep in perfect peace. 3 months. After the confrontation at Dr. Montgomery's office, I stood in my empty living room, sunlight streaming through the windows. The house that had witnessed 40 years of my life now echoed with emptiness, ready for its new owners. The for sale sign had barely been planted when offers started coming in. The housing market was booming, and my charming colonial in a desirable neighborhood had attracted significant interest. The closing had been finalized yesterday, bringing a sum that still seemed unreal. "Are you sure about this?" Eleanor asked, standing beside me. "It's not too late to change your mind." I shook my head, surprising myself with my certainty. "I'm sure." This house stopped being a home the moment I realized what Nathan and Rebecca were planning. The aftermath of our confrontation had unfolded predictably. Nathan had called repeatedly, his messages evolving from angry accusations to tearful apologies to inquiries about my plans for the house. Rebecca had sent a formal letter of apology that read like a legal document designed to protect her from prosecution, rather than a genuine expression of remorse. I had responded to neither. Instead, I had channeled my energy into transformation. The legal actions Gerald initiated resulted in a settlement, Nathan and Rebecca agreeing to return all items they had taken, and to stay away from my property, in exchange for me not pursuing criminal charges for the forged documents. "The movers should be here soon for these last boxes," I told Eleanor. "Then we can head to the new place." "I still can't believe you bought a condo downtown," Eleanor chuckled. "Vivian Lancaster? Urban dweller. Neither can I admitted. "But I like being within walking distance of the library, theater, and that little French cafe." The doorbell rang. Not the movers, but Sarah, Eleanor's niece, arriving with a folder. "Everything's ready," she announced. "The paperwork is complete, the board has approved, and we can announce the foundation next week if you're comfortable with the timeline." I took a deep breath, feeling excitement. "I'm ready." The Vivian Lancaster Educational Foundation had been my response to the question that haunted me. What would I do with my remaining years and the assets I had protected? The answer came as I leafed through my teaching journals, 40 years of notes about students whose potential had been limited by financial constraints. The foundation would provide scholarships to promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds, with a focus on first-generation college attendees and older students returning to education. Every dollar Nathan and Rebecca had hoped to spend on their luxury lifestyle would instead fund someone's dream of education. "There's something else," Sarah added. "The community college called. They're thrilled about your offer to teach that literature seminar next semester." Eleanor laughed. Back in the classroom at 70, I knew retirement wouldn't stick. I felt warmth spreading through me, not just contentment, but purpose. The teaching position had been impulsive, but felt increasingly right. 2 hours weekly, discussing literature with peers who shared my love of books. It wasn't work, it was joy. The movers arrived, loading the remaining boxes. I took one last walk through the empty rooms. In the kitchen, I paused at the breakfast nook where Nathan had done homework. On the wall, faded pencil marks tracked his growth. I touched the highest mark, dated before he left for college, and whispered goodbye. Not to the house, but to the dream of the family I thought we were. "Ready?" Eleanor called. "Ready," I confirmed, not looking back as we left. My phone buzzed. Nathan again. "Mom, just heard you sold the house. Please call me. We need to talk about what this means for all of us." All of us. Even now, he was thinking of himself, of what my decisions meant for his plans. I deleted the message and turned my phone off. My new condo welcomed me with sunlight flooding through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city park. "It's perfect," Eleanor breathed, taking in the hardwood floors, modern kitchen, and cozy reading nook. It was perfect. No ghosts, no painful memories, no shadows of betrayal. Just possibility. By evening, when Eleanor and Sarah had gone, I watched city lights twinkle into existence as dusk settled. I felt none of the loneliness I had feared, only peace. The doorbell rang unexpectedly. Nathan stood in the hallway looking anxious. For a moment, I considered not answering. Then, strengthened by knowing this was my space, my life, my terms, I opened the door. "Mom," he said, the neighbors told me you'd moved. I had to find you." "What do you want, Nathan?" He shifted uncomfortably. Can I come in, please? I hesitated, then stepped aside. This confrontation had been inevitable. Nathan entered cautiously, eyes widening at the elegant space. This is not what I expected. What did you expect? Something smaller, less nice. He struggled for words. You sold the house. Yes. Our family home. My home, I corrected gently. Your home is with Rebecca. He flinched. Rebecca and I are having problems, ever since that day at the doctor's office. I waited, offering no sympathy. Mom, I made a mistake, he finally said. I let Rebecca convince me that we deserved your assets more than you did, that it wasn't fair for you to have this big house, while we struggled with our mortgage. Stop, I interrupted. I don't need to hear justifications. I'm trying to apologize, he insisted. Are you? Because it sounds like you're explaining why your actions were understandable. He fell silent. What do you really want, Nathan? I asked softly. I don't want to lose you, he said simply. The statement hung between us. In another time, it might have melted my resolve, but I was different now. You lost me, I said gently. The moment you decided I was worth more as an asset than as a mother. His eyes filled with tears. People make mistakes, Mom, terrible ones. But they can change, can try to make amends. I looked at my son and felt something shift inside. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it someday. Yes, I agreed. People can change, I have. Hope flickered in his eyes. This is who I am now, independent, clear-sighted, unwilling to be used. If you want any relationship with me, it will be on these terms. And Rebecca? She is not welcome in my life. He nodded slowly. Can we start again, somehow? I considered carefully. Not again. We can't go back. But perhaps forward, differently, slowly. It wasn't the absolution he wanted, but all I could honestly offer. When he left, promising to call next week, I returned. To my window. The future stretched before me, no longer shadowed by others' expectations. My legacy would not be what Nathan inherited, but what countless students would achieve through my foundation. My life would not be defined by what I gave up, but by what I reclaimed. I had learned, at 70, that it's never too late to begin again. Never too late to stand firm. Never too late to build something meaningful from betrayal. The silent legacy I would leave behind would speak volumes.